My name's May. The day my brother David screamed, "You're a complete failure," at me during our family's Sunday dinner, he had no idea that his boss would be calling him within hours asking, "Why is the chairman here?" What he didn't know was that the business card that slipped from my purse as I reached for my napkin would shatter every assumption he'd made about my life for the past 3 years. The silence that followed exposed years of family dynamics built on lies, assumptions, and a secret I'd been carefully guarding. And what happened next revealed just how wrong everyone can be about the person sitting right across from them at the dinner table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of Mom's famous pot roast filled the dining room of their suburban Denver home, the same mahogany table where we'd shared countless Sunday dinners over the years. I'd been dreading this particular gathering for weeks, knowing it would be another opportunity for David to showcase his recent promotion, while subtly undermining whatever small accomplishments I might dare to mention. The late afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains Mom had hung decades ago, casting familiar patterns across the worn hardwood floors I'd played on as a child. I sat in my usual spot, directly across from David, watching him adjust his expensive tie and check his Rolex for the third time since we'd sat down. At 32, my older brother had always been the golden child, the one who followed the prescribed path our parents had mapped out. Harvard MBA, fast track at Morrison & Associates, corner office by 28, and now a senior director position that came with all the prestige and salary our father had dreamed of when he pushed us both toward business careers. Mom bustled around the table, her graying hair pulled back in the same style she'd worn since I was 10, serving generous portions while Dad carved the roast with ceremonial precision. These dinners had become increasingly uncomfortable for me over the past few years, ever since I'd made the decision that changed everything but couldn't tell anyone about it. To them, I was still May the disappointment. May who couldn't hold down a corporate job. May who lived in a modest apartment and drove a 6-year-old Honda Civic. "So David," Dad said, settling into his chair at the head of the table, "tell us more about this new project you're heading up. Your mother and I are so proud of what you've accomplished at Morrison & Associates." His voice carried that particular tone of paternal pride, mixed with the subtle implication that at least one of his children had turned out successfully. David straightened in his chair, clearly relishing the opportunity to hold court. "Well, it's a major infrastructure development deal, Dad. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar partnership with some international investors. I'll be leading a team of 15, coordinating between our firm and the client's executive board." He glanced at me with that familiar expression of superiority I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "It's the kind of project that separates the real players from the wannabes in this business." Mom beamed at him, reaching over to pat his hand. "Oh, honey, that sounds wonderful. I still can't believe how far you've come. Remember when you were little, and you used to play businessman with your toy briefcase?" She laughed at the memory, then turned to me with what I recognized as her well-intentioned but painful attempt at inclusion. "And May, dear, how are things going with your consulting work?" The way she said consulting work made it clear she still didn't really understand what I did for a living. How could she? For the past 3 years, I'd been deliberately vague about my professional life, offering generic responses about, quote, helping small businesses with their strategic planning, and, quote, working with various clients on organizational development. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't anywhere close to the whole truth either. "It's going well, Mom," I replied, taking a sip of water to buy myself a moment. "I've been working with some interesting clients lately, helping them navigate complex business challenges. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." I kept my voice neutral, knowing that any hint of enthusiasm would probably be met with David's skeptical commentary. Sure enough, he leaned back in his chair with that condescending smile I'd learned to hate. "That's sweet, May, but when are you going to get serious about your career? I mean, this freelance consulting thing is fine as a side hustle, but don't you think it's time to pursue something more substantial?" I could probably get you an entry-level position at Morrison & Associates if you're willing to start at the bottom and work your way up like everyone else. The offer was delivered with what he probably thought was generosity, but I could hear the underlying message clearly. He saw me as someone who needed rescuing from my own poor life choices, someone who would be grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity he might throw my way. If only he knew that just last week I'd been in a boardroom in Manhattan, presenting strategic recommendations to executives who controlled budgets larger than his firm's annual revenue. "That's very kind of you to offer, David," I said carefully, "but I'm actually quite happy with the direction my career is taking. I have more autonomy than I've ever had, and the work is intellectually challenging." I tried to keep the defensiveness out of my voice, but it was getting harder each time we had this conversation. Dad set down his fork and looked at me with that expression of paternal concern mixed with disappointment that I'd seen too many times over the years. "May, sweetheart, we just worry about your stability. Consulting can be unpredictable, and you're not getting any younger. What about benefits, retirement planning? Building real equity in your career?" I understood their concerns, I really did. From their perspective, I was drifting through my late 20s without any clear trajectory, living paycheck to paycheck while my brother accumulated all the traditional markers of success. They couldn't see the careful strategy behind my choices, the deliberate way I'd constructed a life that gave me freedom while building something much larger than they could imagine. "I'm doing fine financially, Dad," I assured him, which was true, though they had no idea just how fine I was actually doing. "I've been able to save money, and I'm building valuable relationships in my field. Not everyone needs to follow the same path to be successful." David laughed, not unkindly but with the casual dismissiveness of someone who genuinely believed his way was the only legitimate way. "May, look, I admire your independence, I really do. But let's be realistic here. How much can you really be making with these small-time consulting gigs? I mean, I'm not trying to be harsh, but success leaves clues. You know? Successful people drive nice cars, live in good neighborhoods, take real vacations. They don't." He gestured vaguely at my simple blouse and understated jewelry. "They don't try to convince everyone that living modestly is actually a choice." The comment stung, partly because it touched on something I'd struggled with throughout this entire charade. I'd been living well below my means for 3 years, maintaining the appearance of someone who was just getting by, while my actual financial situation was dramatically different. It was a necessary part of maintaining my cover, but moments like this made me wonder if the secrecy was worth the constant feeling of being misunderstood by the people I loved most. Mom tried to smooth over the tension with her usual diplomatic approach. "Now, David, there's nothing wrong with living simply. May has always been more interested in experiences than material things. Remember how she used to save all her allowance for those art classes, instead of buying clothes like her friends?" It was a sweet attempt at defending me, but it also reinforced the narrative they'd constructed about who I was. The impractical dreamer. The one who valued experiences over security. The family member who needed gentle protection from her own poor judgment. I loved my mother for trying, but her defense actually made me feel worse than David's criticism. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "And you're right, I do value experiences. I've been fortunate to work with some fascinating people and organizations. Just last month, I was able to help a client restructure their entire operational framework, which resulted in significant cost savings and improved efficiency." David's expression suggested he was barely listening, already mentally moving on to topics he found more interesting. "That's nice, May. Really. But efficiency consulting for small businesses is pretty basic stuff. I deal with strategic initiatives that affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in investment. The pressure, the responsibility, the complexity of managing relationships with high-level executives. It's a completely different world." He wasn't wrong about the complexity or the pressure, but he had no idea that I'd been operating in that exact world for longer than he had. Just 2 days earlier, I'd been on a conference call with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, discussing strategies that would affect their global operations. The irony was almost painful. sitting there being lectured about the business world by someone who had no idea I'd been quietly building relationships at levels he was still aspiring to reach. The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, with David sharing stories about important meetings and influential contacts while I offered vague updates about my mysterious consulting work. Dad asked thoughtful questions about market trends and economic indicators, directing most of his attention toward David's responses while politely acknowledging my more general comments. Mom tried to keep things light, steering the conversation toward family news and community gossip whenever the professional discussion became too one-sided. As we moved into dessert, David's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an important text message. He glanced at it, then looked up with barely contained excitement. "Sorry, family time is sacred and all that, but this is actually huge news. Morrison & Associates just landed the Hartwell Group as a client. Do you have any idea what this means for my career trajectory?" Dad leaned forward with interest. "The Hartwell Group? I've heard of them, but remind me what they do exactly." "They're a massive private equity firm," David explained, clearly enjoying the opportunity to educate us. "They manage billions in assets and have interests in everything from technology companies to real estate development. Landing them as a client is like striking gold for a firm like Morrison & Associates. And since I'm leading the infrastructure team, I'll probably be the primary liaison for their construction and development projects." I nearly choked on my coffee. The Hartwell Group wasn't just a client David's firm was hoping to land. They were one of my most important long-term relationships. I'd been working with their executive team for over a year, helping them optimize their investment strategies and streamline their decision-making processes. The idea that David would be serving as their primary liaison, without knowing that his supposedly unsuccessful sister had been advising their leadership team, was so surreal I had to set down my cup to avoid spilling it. "That does sound like a significant opportunity, David," I managed to say, my voice only slightly strained. "The Hartwell Group has an excellent reputation in the industry." He looked at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to be familiar with such a prominent firm. "Yeah, they do. I'm actually meeting with their regional director next week to discuss the scope of our partnership. It's the kind of meeting that could define the next phase of my career." I bit my tongue, knowing that the regional director he was so excited to meet was someone I'd had dinner with just last month, discussing strategies for their upcoming expansion into Asian markets. The same director who'd specifically requested my input on evaluating potential legal and consulting partners for their domestic operations. The irony was becoming almost unbearable. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and Mom's homemade apple pie, the conversation naturally drifted toward more personal topics. David talked about his plans to upgrade to a larger apartment in the downtown district, complete with panoramic city views and access to exclusive amenities. He mentioned casually that he was considering buying a new BMW, something sporty that would reflect his professional success and position in the company. "It's important to look the part," he explained to Dad, who nodded approvingly. "Clients notice these things. When you're representing a firm like Morrison & Associates, you need to project success and competence. The car you drive, the watch you wear, the restaurants you take clients to, it all matters in building credibility and trust." I understood his perspective, even if it felt somewhat superficial to me. Image did matter in business, and I'd certainly benefited from understanding how to present myself appropriately in different professional contexts. The difference was that I'd learned to project competence and authority without relying heavily on material symbols of success. My clients valued my insights and strategies, not my ability to showcase wealth through luxury purchases. "That makes sense," I offered diplomatically. Building trust with clients is definitely important. I've found that consistency and reliability tend to matter more than specific status symbols, but different industries probably have different expectations. David nodded absently, clearly not considering my perspective particularly relevant to serious business relationships. "Exactly. And at the level I'm working at now, with the kind of clients Morrison & Associates serves, first impressions are crucial. You get one chance to establish credibility, and everything from your appearance to your communication style to your professional network gets evaluated immediately." As the evening wound down, I helped Mom clear the coffee cups while David and Dad discussed golf plans for the following weekend. The familiar rhythm of family cleanup felt comforting after the subtle tensions of dinner conversation. Mom and I had developed an efficient system over the years, moving through the kitchen tasks with the easy coordination of people who'd performed these same actions countless times. "May," Mom said quietly as we loaded the dishwasher, "I hope you don't take David's comments too personally. He means well, and he just wants to see you succeed. We all do." I looked at my mother, this woman who'd sacrificed so much to give both her children every opportunity to build good lives, and felt a wave of guilt about the deception I'd been maintaining. She deserved to know the truth about what I'd accomplished, to feel proud of both her children instead of worrying constantly about my supposed lack of direction. "I know he means well, Mom," I replied, drying a serving platter with more attention than it required. "And I know you and Dad worry about me. I wish I could explain things better, but my work situation is complicated right now. I promise you, though, that I'm doing better than it might appear from the outside." She studied my face with the intuitive perception that mothers seem to develop over decades of reading their children's expressions. "You're happy, though? I mean really happy, not just putting on a brave face for us?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and genuine concern. Was I happy? In many ways, yes. I loved the intellectual challenges of my work, the satisfaction of solving complex problems for organizations that trusted my judgment. I'd built a career that gave me flexibility, financial security, and the opportunity to work with fascinating people on projects that genuinely mattered. But the constant need for secrecy, the inability to share my successes with my family, the way I had to sit through conversations like tonight's dinner, those aspects of my life were definitely not making me happy. "I am happy, Mom," I said finally, and meant it. "The work I'm doing is meaningful to me, and I'm building something I'm proud of. It's just not the traditional path that David chose. And sometimes that makes it harder to explain to people who are used to more conventional career trajectories." She nodded thoughtfully, rinsing the last of the dishes and closing the dishwasher. "Your father and we just want to know that you're secure, that you're building towards something stable. We won't always be here to help if things get difficult, and we worry about you managing everything on your own." The concern in her voice was genuine and heartbreaking. If only she knew that I'd been managing quite successfully on my own for years, that my financial security was actually more solid than David's, despite his impressive salary and traditional benefits package. But explaining that would require explaining everything else, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. "I understand why you worry," I told her, giving her a quick hug. "And I promise that if I ever need help or advice, you and Dad will be the first people I call. But right now, things are going well for me, even if it doesn't look exactly like what you might have expected." We rejoined Dad and David in the living room, where the conversation had shifted to sports and local news. I settled into my familiar spot on the couch, listening to David describe his company's corporate box seats at the baseball stadium, and his plans to take important clients to games during the upcoming season. It was the kind of perk that impressed people and facilitated the relationship building that was so crucial to his success in business development. As the evening drew to a close, David gathered his things and prepared to leave for his downtown apartment. He'd had several glasses of wine with dinner and was taking an Uber rather than driving, a responsible decision that reminded me of the thoughtful person he could be when he wasn't so focused on highlighting the differences between our career paths. "Hey, May," he said as we stood by the front door, his tone slightly softer than it had been during dinner. "I hope you know I'm not trying to give you a hard time about your career choices. I just want to see you succeed, and sometimes I worry that you're not pushing yourself hard enough. You're smart, you've got good instincts. I just think you could accomplish more if you aimed higher." It was as close to an apology as David ever offered, and I appreciated the gesture, even though his advice was based on a complete misunderstanding of my actual situation. "I know you mean well, David, and I am aiming high, just in ways that might not be obvious from the outside. But I appreciate that you care about my success." He nodded, seemingly satisfied that we'd reached some kind of understanding. "Good. And hey, that offer about Morrison & Associates is always open if you change your mind. I could probably get you in as a junior analyst or something, give you a chance to see how the big players operate." The patronizing tone was back, but I could hear the genuine desire to help underneath it. "Thank you for thinking of me. I'll definitely keep that in mind." After David left and I'd said my goodbyes to Mom and Dad, I drove home through the quiet Sunday evening streets. processing the complex emotions that these family dinners always stirred up. Part of me longed to tell them the truth, to see the look of surprise and pride on their faces when they realized what I'd actually accomplished. But another part of me knew that maintaining my cover was still necessary, that revealing the truth would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer and create complications I wasn't prepared to handle. My phone buzzed with a text message as I pulled into my apartment parking lot. It was from Patricia Chen, the Hartwell Group's Chief Strategy Officer, asking if I could join a conference call tomorrow morning to discuss their evaluation criteria for legal and consulting partners. The irony wasn't lost on me that while David was preparing for his big meeting with their regional director, I'd be advising the executive team on exactly what qualities they should be looking for in firms like Morrison & Associates. I climbed the stairs to my modest second-floor apartment, unlocking the door to my carefully curated space that reflected none of the financial resources I actually had available. The furniture was nice but not luxurious, the electronics were functional but not cutting-edge, and the overall impression was of someone who managed their money carefully but didn't have substantial wealth to draw upon. In reality, I could have afforded a much nicer place, probably something comparable to the upscale apartment David was so excited about purchasing. But maintaining my cover required consistency in all aspects of my life, and sudden lifestyle changes would raise questions I couldn't answer without revealing secrets I'd spent 3 years protecting. I settled into my home office, a converted bedroom where I kept my real work materials and the technology I needed to serve clients who trusted me with their most sensitive strategic challenges. The contrast between this space and the rest of my apartment was striking. Here, everything was top of the line, from the multiple high-resolution monitors to the secure communication systems that allowed me to participate in confidential discussions with corporate leaders around the world. Opening my laptop, I reviewed my schedule for the coming week. Tomorrow's call with Patricia Chen was just the beginning. I had strategy sessions scheduled with 3 different Fortune 500 companies, a presentation to deliver to a technology startup seeking international expansion guidance, and a dinner meeting with venture capital partners who were evaluating investment opportunities in emerging markets. It was the kind of schedule that would have impressed my family immensely if only they knew about it. Instead, they worried about my financial stability and wondered when I'd finally get serious about building a real career. The disconnect between their perception and my reality had become one of the most challenging aspects of my professional life, requiring me to constantly maintain a careful balance between honesty and deception. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about David's excitement over the Hartwell Group opportunity and what it might mean for our family dynamics when he inevitably discovered my connection to his new client. Would he be impressed, embarrassed, angry that I'd kept such significant information from him? The possibilities were both intriguing and concerning, but I knew that maintaining my cover meant I couldn't warn him or prepare him for what he might discover. The next few weeks were going to be interesting, to say the least. And for the first time in 3 years, I had the feeling that my carefully constructed secret life was about to collide with my family relationships in ways I couldn't predict or control. The following Monday morning arrived with the crisp energy that only autumn in Denver could deliver. I sat in my home office at 7:30, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber, while I prepared for my conference call with Patricia Chen. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I reviewed the Hartwell Group's organizational charts and strategic priorities, knowing that somewhere across town, David was probably getting ready for what he considered the most important week of his career. My phone rang precisely at 8 o'clock, and Patricia's voice came through clear and professional as always. "May, good morning. I hope you're ready to dive into some complex territory today. We've got some significant decisions to make about our domestic partnerships." "Always ready for complex territory, Patricia," I replied, settling back in my chair with my coffee. "I've reviewed the preliminary materials you sent over, and I have some initial thoughts about your evaluation framework." What followed was a 90-minute strategic discussion that covered everything from due diligence protocols to relationship management structures. Patricia and I had developed an effective working dynamic over the past year, and she'd come to rely on my ability to see patterns and potential problems that others might miss. Today's conversation was particularly crucial because the Hartwell Group was preparing to significantly expand their use of external legal and consulting services. "The Morrison & Associates proposal is interesting," Patricia mentioned toward the end of our call. They have a solid reputation, and their infrastructure team seems competent. Their lead director, David Harrington, has impressive credentials. Harvard MBA, strong track record with complex transactions. What's your read on firms like that? I felt my stomach tighten as she unknowingly described my brother's qualifications. Morrison & Associates is well regarded in the Denver market, I said carefully, maintaining my professional tone. They've handled several high-profile deals successfully. For infrastructure projects specifically, they bring good technical expertise and established relationships with regulatory bodies. Good to know. We're scheduling preliminary meetings with several firms over the next 2 weeks. Morrison & Associates is actually first on our list, meeting with Harrington this Thursday. If they perform well in the initial evaluation, we'll move them forward for more detailed presentations. After ending the call with Patricia, I sat staring at my computer screen, processing the strange convergence of my professional and personal worlds. In 3 days, David would walk into a meeting with the Hartwell Group, completely unaware that his sister had been advising their leadership team for over a year. He'd present Morrison & Associates' capabilities and credentials, not knowing that I'd already discussed his firm's strengths and weaknesses with the people who would be evaluating his performance. The ethical implications were complex and uncomfortable. On one hand, I had professional obligations to Patricia and the Hartwell Group that required me to provide honest, unbiased advice about potential partners. On the other hand, David was my brother, and despite our differences, I wanted him to succeed. The fact that he'd spent years condescending to me about my career choices added another layer of complication to an already difficult situation. I decided to compartmentalize the issue for now and focus on my other client obligations. The rest of Monday was filled with strategy sessions and research projects that demanded my full attention. By evening, I'd managed to push thoughts of David's upcoming meeting to the back of my mind, at least temporarily. Tuesday brought an unexpected complication. I was reviewing market analysis reports when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. "May, it's Jennifer Walsh from Morrison & Associates." The voice belonged to David's assistant, someone I'd met briefly at a few family events over the years. "I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from David's emergency contact list. We have a bit of a situation here, and I thought you might be able to help." My pulse quickened. "Is David all right? What kind of situation?" "Oh, he's fine physically," Jennifer assured me quickly, "but he's in a complete panic about this Hartwell Group presentation on Thursday. The senior partner who was supposed to collaborate with him came down with pneumonia yesterday, and now David's scrambling to handle the entire presentation solo. He's been working around the clock, but he's convinced he's going to blow the biggest opportunity of his career." I felt a strange mix of concern for my brother and dark amusement at the situation. "I'm not sure how I can help, Jennifer. My consulting work is pretty different from what Morrison & Associates does." "Well, that's just it," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "David mentioned that you do strategic consulting, and he's really struggling with the strategic framework part of the presentation. He's got all the technical details down, but the Hartwell Group specifically requested a strategic partnership overview, and that's not really David's strongest area. He's too proud to ask you directly, but I thought maybe—" The request hung in the air between us, and I found myself facing an impossible choice. I could help David prepare for his presentation, which would be awkward given my hidden relationship with his potential client, but might actually improve his chances of success. Or I could decline to help, maintaining my professional boundaries but potentially watching my brother fail at something that mattered deeply to him. "Does David know you're calling me?" I asked. "God, no," Jennifer replied immediately. "He'd be mortified. But May, I've never seen him this stressed. He's been here until midnight every night, and he's convinced himself that this presentation will make or break his entire career trajectory. I just thought, if there was any way you could offer some general advice about strategic presentations, it might help him feel more confident." I closed my eyes, weighing my options. "Jennifer, I appreciate you thinking of me, but David and I don't exactly see eye to eye about business strategy. I'm not sure my advice would be welcome, even if it might be helpful." "Look, I know you two have your differences," she said, and I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "But underneath all that competitive stuff, he really respects your intelligence. He just has a hard time admitting it because he's so focused on proving himself. This Hartwell Group deal really matters to him, May. It's not just about the commission or the recognition. He sees it as validation that he belongs in the same league as the top dealmakers in the city. The insight into David's psychology was more revealing than Jennifer probably realized. I'd always assumed his condescending attitude toward my career was pure arrogance. But maybe it was also insecurity. Maybe his need to position himself as the successful sibling was driven by his own fears about whether he truly belonged in the high-stakes business world he'd worked so hard to enter. "I'll think about it," I told Jennifer finally, "but I can't promise anything. The timing is complicated, and I'm not sure David would be receptive to input from me right now." After hanging up, I spent the rest of Tuesday wrestling with the ethical and personal dimensions of the situation. By Wednesday evening, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I called David directly. "May?" His voice sounded exhausted when he answered, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Is everything okay? It's kind of late for a social call." "I heard through the grapevine that you're preparing for a big presentation tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Jennifer Walsh mentioned you might be feeling overwhelmed with the strategic components." There was a long pause, and I could practically hear him debating whether to admit vulnerability or maintain his usual defensive posture. "Jennifer had no business calling you about that," he said finally, but his voice lacked its usual bite. "She's worried about you, David. She says you've been working yourself to death, and she thought maybe I could offer some general perspective on strategic presentations. I know we don't always agree on business approaches, but I do have experience with this kind of thing." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more uncertain than I'd heard in years. "May, I'm drowning here. This Hartwell Group opportunity is everything I've been working toward, and I feel like I'm about to blow it because I can't figure out how to frame our capabilities in strategic terms rather than just technical execution." The admission cost him something. I could hear it in his voice. David had built his identity around being the successful one, the one who had everything figured out. Asking for help, especially from the sister he'd been condescending to for years, was clearly difficult. "Why don't you come over?" I suggested. "Bring your materials, and we can work through some strategic frameworks that might help you organize your presentation more effectively." "You'd do that? Even after?" He trailed off, but I knew he was thinking about Sunday's dinner conversation and all the dismissive comments he'd made about my consulting work. "David, you're my brother. Despite everything, I want to see you succeed. And honestly, strategic frameworks are something I work with all the time. I might actually be able to help." He arrived at my apartment 45 minutes later, carrying a laptop bag and looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was mussed from running his hands through it, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Thanks for this, May," he said as I let him in. "I know I haven't exactly been supportive of your career choices, and I appreciate you being willing to help despite that." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from David, and it caught me off guard. "Let's just focus on getting you ready for tomorrow," I replied, leading him to my dining room table where we could spread out his materials. For the next 3 hours, we worked through David's presentation materials, and I found myself genuinely impressed by the depth of his technical knowledge and his understanding of Morrison and Associates' capabilities. His problem wasn't competence, it was perspective. He'd been thinking about the presentation as a showcase of his firm's qualifications, rather than as a strategic partnership proposal that addressed the client's specific needs and challenges. "The Hartwell Group isn't just looking for legal services," I explained as we reorganized his slides. "They're looking for strategic partners who understand their business objectives and can contribute to their decision-making process. You need to position Morrison and Associates not just as service providers, but as collaborative partners who bring valuable insights to complex transactions." David nodded thoughtfully, making notes as I walked him through different strategic frameworks. "That makes sense. I've been so focused on proving we can handle the technical aspects that I haven't really thought about how to demonstrate strategic value add." "Exactly. And the Hartwell Group specifically values partners who can think systemically about risk management and opportunity optimization. They want to work with firms that understand the broader business context, not just the immediate legal or regulatory requirements. As we refined his presentation, I found myself drawing on my detailed knowledge of the Hartwell Group's priorities and decision-making processes. I was careful not to reveal anything confidential, but I could guide David toward approaches that I knew would resonate with Patricia and her team. It felt strange helping my brother prepare to impress people who were actually my clients, but it also felt right in a way that surprised me. "May, this is brilliant," David said as we finished restructuring his strategic overview. "How did you know to organize it this way? The frameworks you're suggesting are exactly what I was missing, but I never would have thought to approach it from this angle." I hesitated, not sure how to answer without revealing more than I should. I've worked with some larger organizations that have similar strategic priorities. You learn to think about partnerships from the client's perspective rather than just the service provider's perspective. He studied my face with new interest. "What kind of larger organizations? I mean, I know you've said your consulting work involves various clients, but this level of strategic thinking, this isn't small business consulting, is it?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. David was smart, and he was starting to piece together clues that suggested my work might be more sophisticated than I'd been letting on. I could deflect again, maintain the vague descriptions I'd been using for years, but sitting there after hours of productive collaboration, I found myself wanting to be more honest with him. "Some of my clients are larger than I've generally discussed," I admitted carefully. "I've been working with organizations that operate at a pretty high level, strategically speaking. But I can't really go into details about specific engagements because of confidentiality agreements." David's expression shifted as he processed this information. "May, what exactly do you do? I mean, really do, not the generic consulting description you give at family dinners. Because the strategic insights you've provided tonight, this isn't the kind of advice you get from someone who works with small businesses on operational efficiency." I looked at my brother, seeing him really see me for perhaps the first time in years. The condescension was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and what might have been respect. "I provide strategic advisory services to organizations that are navigating complex business challenges," I said, choosing my words carefully. "The work involves everything from market analysis to operational optimization to partnership evaluation. My clients trust me to help them make better decisions about significant strategic initiatives. And these organizations, He paused, clearly trying to reconcile this new information with his assumptions about my career. "They're substantial enough to require this level of strategic sophistication?" "They are," I confirmed. "David, I know my career doesn't look like what you expected, and I know our parents worry about my stability and prospects. But I'm actually doing quite well professionally. The work is challenging, the compensation is competitive, and I'm building relationships with people who value strategic thinking over traditional credentials." He sat back in his chair looking stunned. "May, why didn't you ever tell us this? I mean, if you're working at this level, why let us think you're struggling? Why not share some of this success with the family?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself increasingly often. It's complicated, David. The nature of my work requires a certain level of discretion about clients and engagements. And honestly, after years of feeling like my choices were being judged and found wanting, it became easier to just keep things vague rather than try to explain work that doesn't fit traditional categories. "But May, this is impressive work. Strategic consulting for major organizations, that's exactly the kind of career Dad always hoped we'd both build. Why would you hide success like this?" I smiled ruefully. Because every time I tried to share professional updates, the conversation turned into advice about getting a real job, with benefits and stability. It felt like nothing I accomplished would be taken seriously unless it looked exactly like your path at Morrison & Associates. David was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing both the information and the implications of how our family dynamics had contributed to my secrecy. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I've been incredibly presumptuous about your career, making assumptions without really listening to what you were telling us. And I've probably made family dinners pretty uncomfortable with all my unsolicited career advice." "You were trying to be helpful," I said, though his acknowledgement felt validating in a way I hadn't expected. And honestly, I could have been more assertive about setting the record straight. I just got tired of feeling like I had to justify my choices to people who'd already decided they weren't good enough. Well, after tonight, I definitely understand that your choices have been better than I realized, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. The strategic frameworks you've taught me tonight are more sophisticated than anything I learned in business school. My presentation tomorrow is going to be dramatically better because of your input. As David packed up his materials and prepared to leave, I found myself feeling optimistic about our relationship for the first time in years. The competitive tension that had defined our interactions was beginning to give way to something that felt more like mutual respect and genuine collaboration. "May," he said as he reached the door, "I know I haven't been the most supportive brother when it comes to your career, but after tonight, I want you to know that I'm genuinely impressed by what you've accomplished, and I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize it." "Thank you, David. That means more than you know." After he left, I sat in my living room reflecting on the evening's unexpected developments. Helping David prepare for his presentation had felt good in a way that surprised me, and his growing awareness of my actual professional capabilities had been strangely satisfying. For the first time in 3 years, I'd been able to share some aspects of my real work with a family member, even if I couldn't reveal the full extent of my success or my specific client relationships. But tomorrow would bring new complications. David would walk into his meeting with the Hartwell Group, armed with strategic frameworks I'd helped him develop, presenting to people who were actually my clients. The convergence of my professional and personal worlds was accelerating, and I had no idea how to manage the ethical and emotional complexities that were sure to follow. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message from David. "May, thank you again for tonight. You've given me confidence that I can actually succeed at this level. I owe you dinner at a really good restaurant after I nail this presentation tomorrow." I smiled as I read his message, feeling a warmth that had been missing from our relationship for too long. Whatever complications tomorrow might bring, tonight had reminded me why family relationships were worth fighting for, even when they required navigating difficult truths and uncomfortable revelations. Tomorrow, David would discover just how much his sister's professional world intersected with his biggest career opportunity. And I would have to decide whether maintaining my carefully constructed secrecy was worth the cost of continuing to deceive the people I loved most. Thursday morning arrived with an electric tension that seemed to crackle through the Denver air. I woke up earlier than usual, my mind immediately jumping to the fact that in just a few hours, David would be walking into the Hartwell Group's regional offices to deliver what he considered the most important presentation of his career. What he didn't know was that I'd be joining Patricia Chen and her team for their evaluation discussion immediately following his presentation. I dressed carefully for my own day, choosing a navy blazer and tailored pants that projected competence without drawing unnecessary attention. My calendar was packed with client calls and strategic reviews, but my thoughts kept drifting to David and how he might be feeling as he prepared for his meeting. I'd helped him organize his materials and refine his strategic approach, but ultimately, his success would depend on his ability to connect with Patricia's team and demonstrate Morrison and Associates' value proposition convincingly. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Heading into the meeting in 30 minutes. Feeling more confident thanks to your help last night. Wish me luck." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "You'll do great. Trust your preparation and let your expertise shine through." What I didn't tell him was that I'd be observing his performance from the other side of the conference room table, albeit virtually. Patricia had invited me to join their post-presentation evaluation call to provide strategic perspective on Morrison and Associates' proposal and David's presentation style. It felt surreal, knowing I'd essentially be evaluating my own brother's professional performance for a client who had no idea we were related. The morning passed slowly as I tried to focus on my other work obligations. I had a strategy session with a technology startup seeking international expansion guidance, followed by a market analysis review for a manufacturing company evaluating acquisition opportunities. But despite my best efforts to concentrate, part of my attention remained fixed on what was happening across town at the Hartwell Group offices. At 12:30, my secure line rang with Patricia's call. "May, excellent timing as always." We just finished the Morrison and Associates presentation, and I'd love to get your immediate thoughts while the details are still fresh. Of course, I replied, settling into my desk chair with a notepad. How did it go overall? Better than expected, actually, Patricia said, and I felt a surge of pride for David that I had to carefully conceal. David Harrington exceeded our initial projections for strategic thinking. His presentation was well organized, he demonstrated clear understanding of our business objectives, and his strategic framework was surprisingly sophisticated for someone at his experience level. I kept my voice professionally neutral as I responded. That's encouraging. Did he effectively address your concerns about strategic partnership value rather than just service delivery? He did, and that was perhaps the most impressive aspect of his presentation. Harrington positioned Morrison and Associates as collaborative strategic partners rather than traditional legal service providers. He spoke intelligently about systemic risk management and opportunity optimization in ways that suggested real understanding of our decision-making priorities. Patricia's praise for David felt strange and wonderful simultaneously. I was genuinely proud of how well he'd apparently incorporated the strategic frameworks we'd discussed, but I also felt the uncomfortable weight of my deception growing heavier with each positive comment. What about his technical competencies? I asked, genuinely curious about how David had handled the parts of the presentation that were entirely his own expertise. Solid across the board. His infrastructure development experience is impressive, and he clearly understands the regulatory complexities we face in our domestic expansion projects. The team was particularly interested in his track record with environmental compliance and community engagement strategies. As Patricia continued her evaluation, painting a picture of David's successful performance, I found myself experiencing a complex mix of emotions. Professional pride in helping a client identify a potentially valuable partner, sisterly pride in David's accomplishment, and growing anxiety about the ethical complications of my position, all swirled together in ways that made it difficult to maintain my usual professional composure. Based on this initial meeting, Patricia continued, we're moving Morrison and Associates forward to the next evaluation phase. We'll want to see detailed case studies and meet with their full infrastructure team, but Harrington made a strong first impression. That's excellent news, I managed to say. What timeline are you considering for the extended evaluation process? Probably 2 to 3 weeks for comprehensive due diligence. Then final partnership decisions by month end. We're evaluating 3 firms total, but Morrison and Associates is definitely in the running, based on today's presentation. After ending the call with Patricia, I sat staring at my computer screen, processing the strange reality of having just participated in a professional evaluation of my own brother. David had succeeded brilliantly, incorporating strategic concepts I'd helped him understand, while demonstrating technical expertise that was entirely his own achievement. He'd earned his advancement to the next phase of Hartwell Group's selection process, but I couldn't help feeling complicit in a deception that was becoming increasingly complex. My phone rang again almost immediately, this time with David's number appearing on the screen. His voice was electric with excitement when I answered. May, I can't believe it, but I think I actually nailed that presentation. The Hartwell Group team seemed genuinely impressed, and they're moving us forward to the next evaluation phase. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but this feels like the breakthrough I've been working toward for years. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite the complicated circumstances. David, that's fantastic news. I'm so happy for you. Tell me how it went. It was incredible, May. I walked in there feeling nervous but prepared, and everything we worked on last night clicked into place perfectly. When they asked about strategic partnership value, I was ready with frameworks and examples. When they wanted to understand our approach to risk management and opportunity optimization, I could speak their language in ways that seemed to surprise them. The irony of David unknowingly describing how well he'd communicated with my own clients was almost overwhelming, but I managed to focus on his excitement and genuine accomplishment. You earned this success, David. The strategic frameworks we discussed were just tools. You're the one who understood how to apply them and integrate them with your technical expertise. Maybe, but May, I couldn't have done this without your help. The way you helped me think about the client's perspective instead of just showcasing our capabilities, that was the difference between a good presentation and a great one. I owe you more than dinner at a nice restaurant. I owe you a real apology for underestimating your professional capabilities. His gratitude felt both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful, because our relationship was healing in ways I'd hoped for but never expected. Terrible, because his success was built partly on insights I'd gained through my hidden relationship with his potential client. The ethical implications were becoming impossible to ignore. David, I'm just glad I could help. You deserve this opportunity, and I hope Morrison & Associates gets selected for the partnership. Thanks, May. And hey, I want to take you to dinner this weekend, to celebrate, and to thank you properly. Somewhere really nice, my treat. I know I've been condescending about your career choices, but after seeing your strategic thinking in action, I have a completely different perspective on what you've accomplished. After ending the call with David, I found myself facing an increasingly urgent decision about whether to reveal my connection to the Hartwell Group. David's success felt tainted by my deception, even though he'd genuinely earned his advancement through his own competence and preparation. The strategic insights I'd provided were general frameworks that any experienced consultant might offer. But my knowledge of the Hartwell Group's specific priorities had certainly influenced how I'd guided his preparation. The rest of Thursday passed in a blur of routine client work, but my thoughts kept returning to the ethical dilemma I was facing. By evening, I decided that I needed advice from someone outside the situation, someone who could help me think through the professional and personal implications of my choices. I called Rebecca Morrison, a former colleague from my early consulting days who'd become a trusted friend and occasional sounding board for complex professional situations. Rebecca had built her own successful practice and understood the challenges of maintaining client confidentiality while navigating personal relationships. May, it's been too long, Rebecca said warmly when she answered my call. How are things going with the mysterious, high-level consulting work you're always being vague about? Actually, that's exactly what I need to talk to you about, I replied. I'm facing an ethical situation that's more complicated than anything I've dealt with before, and I could use perspective from someone who understands this kind of work. Ethical complications are my specialty, Rebecca said with a laugh. Lay it on me. I explained the situation carefully, avoiding specific names but providing enough detail for Rebecca to understand the core dilemma. My brother had unknowingly presented to my client. I'd helped him prepare using general strategic knowledge, and now he was advancing in a selection process where I'd continue to be involved in evaluation discussions. Wow, Rebecca said when I finished explaining. That's a genuinely complex situation. Let me ask you a few questions to help clarify the ethical boundaries. First, did you provide your brother with any confidential information about your client's decision-making process or specific evaluation criteria? No, I said firmly. I was careful to only discuss general strategic frameworks and presentation approaches that any experienced consultant might suggest. I didn't reveal anything about the Hartwell Group's internal processes or specific priorities. Good. Second question. Did your client explicitly ask for your evaluation of your brother's firm, or were you brought in to provide general strategic perspective on potential partners? General strategic perspective, I confirmed. Patricia doesn't know I have any personal connection to Morrison & Associates or David specifically. Okay, and third, if your brother's firm gets selected, would you have ongoing involvement in managing that partnership relationship? I paused, realizing I hadn't fully considered this implication. Potentially, yes. I often provide ongoing strategic advice about partner relationships and performance evaluation. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the complexities. May, I think you're facing a situation where maintaining your current approach is going to become increasingly difficult and potentially problematic. Your brother is advancing in a process where you'll continue to have influence, and that creates genuine conflicts of interest that go beyond the initial presentation preparation. So what do you think I should do? You have 3 options as I see it, Rebecca said thoughtfully. First, you could recuse yourself from any further involvement in the Morrison & Associates evaluation, telling your client you have a conflict of interest without specifying what it is. Second, you could reveal your relationship to your brother and let your client decide how to handle the conflict. Third, you could tell your brother about your client relationship and let him decide whether to proceed with knowledge of the connection. Each option carried significant risks and complications. Recusing myself might damage my relationship with Patricia and the Hartwell Group, especially if they couldn't understand why I was suddenly unavailable for an important strategic decision. Revealing the relationship to Patricia might compromise my professional credibility and raise questions about my previous advice. Telling David would certainly shock him and might create family complications I wasn't prepared to handle. "What would you do?" I asked Rebecca. "Honestly, I'd probably tell my brother. He's the one who's potentially benefiting from information asymmetry, even if it wasn't intentional. He deserves to know that his sister is involved in evaluating his performance, and then he can make an informed decision about how to proceed." After ending the call with Rebecca, I spent Thursday evening wrestling with her advice and my own instincts about the situation. Part of me wanted to maintain the status quo, to continue helping David succeed while protecting my client relationships and avoiding complicated family revelations. But another part of me recognized that the deception was becoming unsustainable and potentially unfair to everyone involved. Friday morning brought an unexpected development that forced my hand. Patricia called with news that the Hartwell Group wanted to accelerate their partner selection timeline due to an emerging acquisition opportunity that would require immediate legal support. "May, we need to fast-track our due diligence on the 3 finalist firms," Patricia explained. "We've got a potential acquisition target that's become available unexpectedly, and we need legal partners in place within 2 weeks to support the transaction analysis." "What does that mean for your evaluation process?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "We're scheduling intensive evaluation sessions with each firm next week. Full-day presentations, meetings with complete teams, detailed case study reviews. And I'd like you to be directly involved in all 3 evaluations to provide strategic perspective on partnership fit and long-term collaboration potential." The timeline compression meant I'd be spending significant time over the next week directly evaluating David's performance and that of his Morrison and Associates colleagues. The ethical complications I'd been wrestling with were about to become much more immediate and intense. "Patricia, I need to mention something," I said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. "I have a potential conflict of interest that I should disclose before we proceed with the accelerated evaluation process." "What kind of conflict?" she asked, her voice becoming more cautious. "I have a family relationship with one of the professionals at Morrison and Associates. It's not something that would have affected my ability to provide objective strategic advice during your general partner evaluation process. But with the intensive evaluation sessions you're planning, I think disclosure is appropriate." There was a pause as Patricia processed this information. "Which professional at Morrison and Associates?" "David Harrington, their infrastructure development director. He's my brother." The silence that followed felt endless. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "May, this is obviously significant information. How long have you been aware that Morrison and Associates was under consideration for our partnership program?" "Since our conversation on Monday when you first mentioned them as a potential candidate," I replied honestly. "I didn't bring it up initially because my relationship with David shouldn't influence the strategic advice I provide about partnership evaluation frameworks in general. But you're right that it becomes more significant with direct involvement in firm-specific evaluations." "And David Harrington is unaware of your client relationship with us?" "Correct. He knows I do strategic consulting for larger organizations, but he doesn't know about my specific client relationships due to standard confidentiality protocols." Patricia was quiet again, and I could practically hear her thinking through the implications. "May, I appreciate your disclosure, and I understand the difficulty of the situation. Give me some time to consider how best to handle this. I'll call you back by end of day with our decision about how to proceed." After ending the call, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. I'd finally revealed the conflict that had been weighing on me, but I had no idea what consequences that disclosure might bring. Patricia might decide that my involvement in the evaluation process was now impossible, which could damage my relationship with one of my most important clients. Or she might decide that Morrison and Associates should be eliminated from consideration due to the complication, which would devastate David, just as he was experiencing his biggest career breakthrough. The day passed slowly as I waited for Patricia's callback, trying to focus on other work while anticipating a conversation that might change everything about my professional and personal relationships. By 5 o'clock, I was pacing my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes for missed calls or messages. Finally, at 5:30, Patricia called back. Her voice was businesslike, but not unfriendly when I answered. "May, I've discussed your disclosure with our executive team, and we've decided how we'd like to handle the situation," she began. "First, we appreciate your honesty in bringing this to our attention. Professional integrity is one of the reasons we value our relationship with you, and your disclosure reinforces that trust." I felt a small surge of relief, but waited to hear the rest of her decision. "Second, we don't believe your family relationship with David Harrington compromises the strategic advice you've provided about our partnership evaluation process. Your insights have been about frameworks and approaches, not about specific firms or individuals." "Thank you," I managed to say. I was concerned that the relationship might create problems for our working relationship. "However," Patricia continued, "we do think it's inappropriate for you to be directly involved in evaluating Morrison and Associates during our intensive review process next week. We'll handle those sessions internally and bring you back into the advisory role once we've made our final partnership decisions." It was a reasonable compromise, though it meant I'd be excluded from directly observing David's performance during the most crucial phase of his evaluation. I understand completely, and I think that's the right approach given the circumstances. "There is one more thing, May," Patricia said, and her tone became more serious. "We think David Harrington should be informed about your advisory relationship with us. Not the details of your work or the content of our discussions, but the basic fact that you've been providing strategic consulting to the Hartwell Group. It seems unfair for him to continue in our evaluation process without knowing about the connection." My stomach dropped. "You want me to tell him?" "We think the disclosure should come from you, yes. You understand both relationships better than we do, and you're better positioned to explain the situation in a way that maintains appropriate confidentiality while ensuring transparency." After ending the call with Patricia, I sat in my living room as evening shadows lengthened across the floor, contemplating a conversation with David that would change everything between us. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from secretly helping my brother prepare for a presentation to being required to reveal that I'd been advising his potential client all along. The convergence of my professional and personal worlds was no longer something I could manage from the shadows. Tomorrow, I'd have to tell David the truth about my work, my clients, and the strange coincidence that had brought our separate lives crashing together in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I'd spent most of Friday night rehearsing different ways to tell David about my relationship with the Hartwell Group, but every approach felt inadequate for the magnitude of what I needed to reveal. How do you tell your brother that you've been secretly advising the client he considers his biggest career opportunity? How do you explain 3 years of deliberate misdirection about your professional success? I called David around 10 o'clock, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed his number. "Hey, May," he answered cheerfully. "Perfect timing. I was just about to call you to finalize dinner plans for tonight. I made reservations at Meridian, that new steakhouse downtown. I figured we should celebrate properly." "David, we need to talk before dinner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something important has come up regarding your Hartwell Group opportunity. Can you come over this morning?" The change in my tone must have alarmed him, because his voice immediately became more serious. "Is everything okay? Did something happen with the evaluation process?" "It's complicated," I replied. "But yes, something has developed that affects your situation with them. I'd rather explain in person." An hour later, David arrived at my apartment looking concerned and slightly confused. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to the polished professional image he'd projected during his presentation. Without his usual armor of expensive suits and corporate confidence, he looked younger, more vulnerable, and I felt a pang of guilt about what I was about to do to his world. "May, you're making me nervous," he said as I let him in. "What's going on with the Hartwell Group? Did they change their minds about moving Morrison and Associates forward?" "Sit down, David," I said, gesturing toward my living room. What I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking, and I need you to hear the whole story before you react. He settled onto my couch, his expression growing more worried by the minute. You're scaring me. Just tell me what happened. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would irrevocably change our relationship. David, I need to tell you about my consulting work. The real nature of my consulting work, not the vague descriptions I've been giving our family for the past 3 years. Okay, he said slowly. I'm listening. I provide strategic advisory services to Fortune 500 companies and major investment firms. My clients include technology corporations, private equity groups, and financial institutions that manage billions in assets. The work involves everything from market expansion strategies to merger and acquisition analysis to partnership evaluation frameworks. David stared at me, clearly trying to process this information. May, that's incredible. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling with small business consulting? Because the nature of my work requires absolute confidentiality about client relationships, I continued. I sign non-disclosure agreements that prevent me from discussing specific engagements or even identifying my clients in most cases. And because after years of feeling judged about my career choices, it became easier to remain vague, rather than try to explain work that doesn't fit traditional corporate structures. But May, this is exactly the kind of career success Dad always hoped we'd achieve. Why would you hide accomplishments like this? I looked at my brother, seeing the confusion and hurt beginning to form in his expression. David, there's more. Something specific about your Hartwell Group opportunity that you need to know. His face went pale. What about the Hartwell Group? I've been providing strategic consulting services to the Hartwell Group for over a year, I said quietly. Patricia Chen, their Chief Strategy Officer, is one of my primary client contacts. I've been advising their executive team on investment strategies, partnership evaluations, and operational optimization. The silence that followed was deafening. David's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to something approaching horror, as the implications of my revelation became clear. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you've been working with the Hartwell Group this entire time? That when I was preparing for the biggest presentation of my career, you knew they were your client? Yes, I admitted. I've been their strategic advisor since early last year. When you mentioned landing them as a potential client at Sunday dinner, I realized there was a connection, but I couldn't reveal it due to confidentiality obligations. David stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around my living room. May, do you understand what this means? You helped me prepare for a presentation to your own clients. You gave me strategic insights based on your knowledge of their priorities and decision-making processes. This isn't just a coincidence. This is what, David? I asked, though I suspected I knew where his thoughts were heading. This is manipulation, he said, his voice rising. You used your client relationship to help me succeed, which means I didn't actually earn this opportunity. My advancement to the next phase isn't based on my competence or Morrison & Associates qualifications. It's based on insider information you provided. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd expected it. David, that's not true. The strategic frameworks I shared with you were general consulting principles that any experienced advisor might suggest. I was careful not to reveal anything specific about the Hartwell Group's evaluation criteria or internal processes. But you knew their priorities, he countered. You knew what kind of strategic thinking would impress them, because you've been working with them for over a year. Even if you didn't share specific details, your knowledge of their perspective influenced everything you suggested. I couldn't deny the truth in his accusation, even though my intentions had been to help him succeed rather than to manipulate the process. You're right that my familiarity with their strategic approach influenced the advice I gave you. But David, the technical expertise, the presentation skills, the understanding of infrastructure development that impressed them, that was all you. I couldn't have faked competencies you don't actually possess. That's not the point, May, he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The point is that I've been competing in a process where you had access to information that gave me an unfair advantage. How is that different from cheating? The word hit me harder than I expected. David, I was trying to help you succeed, not to undermine the integrity of the selection process. When you were struggling with the strategic components of your presentation, I saw an opportunity to share general consulting knowledge that might make the difference between success and failure. But you made that decision without telling me about the conflict of interest, he pointed out. You let me believe I was succeeding on my own merits when really I was benefiting from your insider position. That's not help, May. That's deception. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes as the full weight of my choices became clear. You're right. I should have told you about the connection immediately. I should have explained the conflict and let you decide how to handle it. I was trying to protect both my professional obligations and your opportunity, but I ended up compromising both. David stopped pacing and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd begun my explanation. May, how successful are you? I mean really successful. Because if you're advising Fortune 500 companies and major investment firms, this isn't just a good career. This is extraordinary success that you've been hiding from our entire family. The question forced me to confront another layer of deception I'd been maintaining. I'm very successful, David. More successful than I think any of us expected when I started consulting. The compensation is substantial, the client relationships are rewarding, and the work challenges me in ways I never experienced in traditional corporate roles. How substantial? He pressed. I hesitated, knowing that revealing the financial details would add another dimension to his shock and confusion. Substantial enough that I could afford a lifestyle similar to yours if I chose to. I live modestly by choice, not necessity. David sank back onto the couch, looking stunned. May, you've been letting us worry about your financial stability while you're actually more successful than I am? You've been enduring our advice about getting a quote 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 while you're advising companies that dwarf Morrison and Associates in scope and influence. I know how it sounds, I said defensively, but maintaining confidentiality about my work required maintaining consistency in all aspects of my life. Sudden lifestyle changes would have raised questions I couldn't answer without violating client agreements. So you let our parents worry about your future? You let me condescend to you about career development while you were operating at a level I'm still trying to reach? May, that's not just professional discretion. That's deliberate deception of your own family. His words stung because they contained uncomfortable truths I'd been avoiding. My commitment to confidentiality had provided cover for choices that went beyond professional necessity into personal self-protection. I'd used my work obligations as an excuse to avoid difficult family conversations about success, expectations, and the different paths we'd chosen. You're right, I admitted. Some of my secrecy was about professional requirements, but some of it was about avoiding judgment and criticism. After years of feeling like my choices were constantly being questioned, it became easier to let you think I was struggling, rather than risk having my success dismissed or minimized. May, we would have been proud of you, David said, his voice softening slightly. Dad would have been thrilled to know you were building the kind of career he always hoped for. Mom would have worried less and bragged more. Why couldn't you trust us with your success? The vulnerability in his question broke through my defensive posture, because I was afraid that even extraordinary success wouldn't be enough if it didn't look like traditional success. Because I'd spent so many years hearing about the importance of stability and conventional career progression that I convinced myself my unconventional path would never be valued, regardless of the outcomes. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. David seemed to be wrestling with the implications for his Hartwell Group opportunity, while I was confronting the reality that 3 years of careful deception had finally collapsed in ways I'd never anticipated. What happens now? David finally asked. With the Hartwell Group, I mean. Do they know about our relationship? Yes, I said. I disclosed the conflict to Patricia Chen yesterday when they wanted to accelerate the evaluation timeline. They've decided to proceed with Morrison and Associates in the selection process, but they've removed me from direct involvement in your firm's evaluation. And they want you to tell me about the connection? They felt it was unfair for you to continue in the process without knowing about my advisory relationship with them. They left it to me to determine how much detail to share while maintaining appropriate confidentiality about my work. David was quiet again, clearly thinking through his options. May, I don't know how to proceed with this. Part of me wants to withdraw Morrison and Associates from consideration Because I can't be sure whether our advancement was based on merit or on your insider influence. But this opportunity could define my career, and walking away feels like professional suicide. What if you didn't have to choose? I suggested tentatively. What if there was a way to move forward that acknowledged the complication, while ensuring that your ultimate success or failure was based purely on Morrison and Associates qualifications? What do you mean? I could formally recuse myself from any further involvement in the Hartwell Group's partner selection process, I explained. Not just from evaluating Morrison and Associates, but from the entire decision-making framework. That would ensure that whatever happens from this point forward is based solely on your firm's performance during their evaluation sessions. David considered this possibility. But wouldn't that damage your relationship with a major client? If you step away from an important strategic decision, doesn't that compromise your professional standing with them? It was a perceptive question that showed how quickly he was grasping the professional implications of the situation. It might, I acknowledged, but Patricia Chen values integrity and transparency. I think she'd respect a decision to prioritize ethical considerations over client engagement, especially given the unusual circumstances. May, I can't ask you to potentially damage your career to fix a problem that I'm partly responsible for, David said. I pushed you for help with my presentation. I created the situation where your professional knowledge got tangled up with family dynamics. You didn't know about the conflict, I pointed out. I did. The responsibility for managing the situation appropriately was mine, and I failed to handle it properly from the beginning. We continued discussing possible approaches for another hour, exploring various scenarios and their potential consequences. Throughout the conversation, I could see David's perception of me continuing to shift as he processed not just the revelation about my client relationship, but the broader truth about my professional success and the complexity of the choices I had been making. May, he said finally, I owe you a massive apology, not just for today's accusations about manipulation, but for years of condescending comments about your career. I made assumptions based on incomplete information and used those assumptions to position myself as more successful and sophisticated than you. That was arrogant and unfair, and I'm genuinely sorry. You couldn't have known, I replied. I deliberately kept you in the dark about my work. Your assumptions were based on the information I chose to share, which was minimal and misleading. But I should have trusted that you were intelligent and capable enough to make good decisions about your own life, he said. Instead, I appointed myself as your career advisor without bothering to understand what you were actually accomplishing. That says more about my insecurity than about your choices. His insight into his own motivations surprised me. Your insecurity? May, do you realize how intimidating it is to discover that your younger sister has been operating at a strategic level you're still aspiring to reach? That while you've been feeling superior about your Harvard MBA and corner office, she's been quietly building relationships with executives who control budgets larger than your firm's annual revenue? It's humbling in ways I'm still processing. The raw honesty in his admission touched something deep in our relationship that had been strained for years. David, we're both successful professionals who've built careers we can be proud of. The fact that our paths have been different doesn't make either of them less valuable or impressive. Maybe, he said. But it definitely means I need to recalibrate my understanding of success and stop measuring everyone else's achievements against my own narrow definition of career progression. As our conversation continued into the afternoon, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty. The revelations had been painful and complicated, but they'd also cleared away years of misunderstanding and resentment that had been poisoning our interactions. What do we tell Mom and Dad? David asked as we began to wrap up our discussion. It was a question I'd been dreading. I think we tell them the truth. About my work, about the success I've been hiding, and about why I felt the need to hide it. They deserve to know who I really am professionally, and they deserve to understand that their worries about my stability have been unnecessary. That's going to be a shock, David observed. Dad especially has been genuinely concerned about your long-term financial security. Finding out you've been more secure than any of us probably imagined will require some adjustment. I know, but maintaining the deception has become more costly than revealing the truth. And after today's conversation with you, I'm optimistic that they might be more understanding and supportive than I expected. As David prepared to leave, he turned to me with a question that had obviously been weighing on him. May, are you happy? I mean, putting aside all the success and financial security, are you actually happy with the life you've built? It was the same question Mom had asked me after Sunday dinner, and it still didn't have a simple answer. I'm proud of my work and grateful for the opportunities I've had, I said thoughtfully. But the secrecy has been exhausting, and the inability to share my professional life with my family has been lonelier than I expected. So yes, I'm happy with my career, but I'm hoping that going forward I can be happy with more integrated and honest relationships as well. David smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him since my revelations began. Well, you'll definitely have more honest relationships now, whether you wanted them or not. After he left, I sat in my apartment as evening approached, feeling simultaneously drained and relieved. The most difficult conversation was over, but I knew that the consequences of today's revelations would continue to unfold in ways I couldn't predict. Tomorrow, I'd need to call Patricia and formalize my recusal from the partner selection process. Next week, I'd need to have another difficult conversation with my parents. And eventually, I'd need to figure out how to rebuild my family relationships while maintaining the professional success I'd worked so hard to achieve. But for the first time in 3 years, I wouldn't be carrying the weight of deception that had made every family interaction feel like a performance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least they'd be based on truth rather than the carefully constructed fiction I'd been maintaining. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something better, even if it was also the end of the careful control I'd exercised over how my family perceived my life and choices. 3 weeks later, I stood in the conference room at Morrison & Associates, watching David shake hands with Patricia Chen as they finalized the partnership agreement that would transform his career trajectory. The Hartwell Group had selected Morrison & Associates as their primary legal partner, after a rigorous evaluation process that I'd deliberately stayed away from, ensuring that David's success was entirely his own achievement. Congratulations, Mr. Harrington, Patricia said warmly. We're excited about this partnership and the strategic value Morrison & Associates will bring to our upcoming projects. David's smile was genuine and confident as he responded. Thank you, Ms. Chen. We're honored by your trust and looking forward to supporting the Hartwell Group's continued growth. I watched this exchange from the back of the room, having been invited by David to witness the signing ceremony. Patricia had graciously agreed to my presence, understanding that family support was important during milestone moments. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that I was now attending as David's sister rather than as the Hartwell Group's strategic advisor. After the formal proceedings concluded, Patricia approached me with the professional warmth that had characterized our working relationship for over a year. May, I want you to know that your decision to step away from our partner selection process was noted and appreciated by our entire executive team. That kind of ethical clarity is exactly why we've valued your advisory services. Thank you, Patricia. I hope my recusal didn't create unnecessary complications for your decision-making process. On the contrary, she replied. It demonstrated the kind of integrity we look for in all our professional relationships. When you're ready to resume your advisory role, we'll be delighted to welcome you back. The offer was both generous and professionally significant. By handling the conflict transparently, I'd actually strengthened rather than damaged my relationship with one of my most important clients. It was a lesson in the power of honesty that I wished I'd learned earlier. David joined our conversation, his expression mixing pride with residual amazement at the revelations of recent weeks. Ms. Chen, I hope you know how grateful I am for this opportunity, and I appreciate your understanding about the family connection situation. Mr. Harrington, your sister's advisory relationship with us had no bearing on our final decision, Patricia assured him. Morrison & Associates earned this partnership through superior strategic thinking, technical competence, and presentation quality. The fact that you have a family connection to one of our advisors is simply an interesting coincidence. After Patricia left, David and I found ourselves alone in the conference room, where his dreams had just become reality. May, I still can't believe this is really happening, he said, looking around the space where he'd spent countless hours preparing proposals and presentations. 6 months ago, the Hartwell Group was just a name I'd heard in industry publications. Now they're our biggest client. and it's going to change everything about my career trajectory. You earned every bit of this success, David, I told him sincerely. Your technical expertise, your strategic insights, your presentation skills, all of that was genuine competence that no amount of family connection could have manufactured. He nodded thoughtfully. I know that now, but it took me a while to separate my accomplishment from my anger about the deception. I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that your success doesn't diminish mine, and my success doesn't diminish yours. That evening, our entire family gathered at Mom and Dad's house for what had become a very different kind of Sunday dinner. The atmosphere was celebratory rather than tense, with genuine enthusiasm replacing the competitive undercurrents that had characterized our interactions for years. I still can't get over it, Dad said as he carved the roast, shaking his head in wonder. Both of my children building careers at the highest levels of their respective fields, and I was too blind to see what May had accomplished. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of what you've built, but I'm even prouder that you felt comfortable enough to share it with us. I know we probably made that harder than it should have been. You didn't know, I assured her. I made choices about privacy and secrecy that went beyond what was professionally necessary. I should have trusted you with more of the truth. David raised his wineglass in a toast. To May, who taught me that success comes in many forms, and that being smart enough to ask for help from brilliant people is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. And to David, I responded, who reminded me that family relationships are worth the risk of vulnerability, and that honesty usually creates better outcomes than careful deception. As we clinked glasses, I felt a warmth and connection that had been missing from our family gatherings for far too long. The competitive tension had been replaced by mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's different paths to success. Later that week, I received a text from David that made me smile. May, the Hartwell Group just assigned us a major acquisition project that's going to require sophisticated strategic analysis. Any chance you know a brilliant consultant who might be available for some general strategic advice? Asking for a friend. I texted back, I might know someone. But this time, all cards on the table from the beginning. Wouldn't have it any other way, he replied. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different conference room, this time as David's invited strategic consultant, working openly and transparently on a Hartwell Group project that utilized both Morrison & Associates' legal expertise and my strategic advisory services. The partnership that had begun with deception and secrecy had evolved into something much more valuable. A professional collaboration built on mutual respect, complementary skills, and complete honesty. May, David said as we wrapped up our latest planning session, I've been thinking about something. Remember when you asked if I was happy with my career? Well, now I want to ask you the same question. Are you happy with how everything turned out? I looked around the room at the evidence of our successful collaboration, thought about the rebuilt trust in our family relationships, and considered the relief of finally living without the weight of constant deception. Yes, I said simply. For the first time in years, I'm completely happy with both my professional success and my personal relationships. Turns out honesty really is the best policy, even when it's terrifying to implement. David laughed. Especially when it's terrifying to implement. That's when you know it's really going to matter. As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave, I realized that the crisis that had threatened to destroy my carefully constructed life had actually given me something far more valuable. The freedom to be completely myself with the people who mattered most. Sometimes the best transformations begin with the scariest revelations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.